Deep in the heart of every man lies an image of his land, familiar and strong to arouse and inspire loyalties. To Canadians, that image lies in the picture of a windswept pine tree up in the rocky Laurentian Shield. Its trunk is a harp for the play of the west wind. Its branches curve a bow across clear northern lakes. The painter of the picture is Tom Thomson, a farm boy who answered the call of the North and created from the Canadian woodland images that bear the stamp of conviction. Tom Thomson came of pioneer stock. His father James bent his 6 feet of muscles to root out from an unfriendly land gnarled stumps and brush. Out of the wilderness, he built the sturdy red brick farmhouse, leaning into the hill that stood looking over his broad acres. Thompson went to school at Leith near Owen Sound on the Georgian Bay, an arm of Lake Huron. And after school, he roamed through the woodland trails, spent long golden afternoons fishing for suckers in the sluggish little streams. Even then, his skill as a painter caught the reflection of his concentrated skill as a fisherman. And on an old piece of beaver board with cheap store paint, he set down the boy he knew, dark, intense, resourceful. In the dappled waters of slow-flowing streams, he first learned to handle a rowboat on the lazy summer days. When the nights smelled of frost, his easy stride took him hunting for jackrabbits along the windy uplands. And from high on a hilltop, when the east wind stirred the ripening grain, he could look over to the Sound and see the lake steamers pull out, heading south to the big cities of Michigan and Ontario. So Thompson came to the city, to Toronto, and in the endless gray confusion of a great industrial town, he found employment as a commercial artist in a small firm headed by Albert Robson, who had gathered around him young men destined to start a new movement in Canadian art. In the confined space, Thompson's deft fingers swiftly mastered the technique of designing for engravings. His sense of pattern was already original, and his easy brush flowed swiftly on the paper. On Saturday afternoons and Sundays, Thompson went with his fellow artists on sketching trips round Toronto from the end of the car line. With sketch boxes and a sandwich lunch, they swung upward through the spring woods near York Mills. They sketched under softly clouded spring skies on the banks of the Humber River. To Thompson, as to all young artists, disappointments were many, but the petulant gesture of the student unable to control his brush could always lead to other skills, for he had a craftsman's fingers that returned him continually to his own woodland world. One weekend, Thompson went duck shooting in the marshes of Lake Scugog, 40 miles from Toronto. Here, in thick pigment, lies his first vision of the Canadian scene. That winter, Thompson's friend, Bill Broadhead, spoke of the open country to the north. He told of a land where long, low ridges of rock cut sharply against the sky, where the colors stood in high relief. A land of bold outlines and little compromise, where a man might paddle a canoe for 3 weeks on end, lost in the wilderness, and in the silence of deep water, shatter the stillness by a single stroke of the paddle. A land for the woodsman, a land, too, for the painter, with a tangle of thick timber fringing the lake shore with shifting designs. Next summer, Thompson and Broadhead took a 300-mile canoe trip from Biscatacing on the transcontinental line north of Sudbury, Ontario, over the height of land, and back again down the Mississauga River till it falls into northern Lake Huron. Low with equipment, their canoe struck deep into the north for 2 months. They lifted the canoe onto their backs and plodded over the rough portages among the mottled light of the cool summer woods. They mounted the still upper reaches of the great rivers that empty into Hudson's Bay. They cruised beneath the crags of a land carved in the grand manner. In a tangle of white water, they shot down the Mississauga River between the weathered rocks of Algoma. Thompson came back with his first northern sketches. His bold color spoke of a new freedom. His friends agreed, go north. It freshens the color sense. On the borders of New Ontario, near where the curving Ottawa has provided since the days of Champlain a portage to Lake Huron, lies Algonquin Park. Through 2,000 square miles, larger than Prince Edward Island or the state of Delaware, lie ridges of low hills clothed with straggling trees. Among them run wide rivers named by the Indians, the Madawaska, the Magnetawan. A somber land, the shape sharp and angular, broken only by the glint of water. The wildlife is tame and gracious, even when disturbed. And along the foaming rivers, the thrust of the lumberjack sends the logs from the camps tumbling down into the spring freshets. Thompson went north to Algonquin in the spring and painted right through to the fall of the year. His palette found a new certainty, and on little birch panels, he began to set down for the hearts of men his compelling image of the Canadian North, the silvery sentinels of birch as the sun catches their trunks, the silhouette of a gnarled pine lifting above bare rock, and the dark gleam of water. One of the sketches, a northern lake, he worked up into a stormy canvas, and the Ontario government bought it. Among those who attended the exhibitions regularly was Dr. James McCallum, a lover of the North himself. With a shack in the Georgian Bay, McCallum seized on Thompson's sketches, for on the long line of swift impressions, he saw eagerly put down in paint for the first time the vision he felt but could not express. He introduced Thompson to another young artist, A.Y. Jackson. The two painters took a studio together that winter. Later, Thompson moved out into a nearby shack, which he fitted up like a true woodsman. Under the icy skies of mid-March, when the snow still shrouds the Canadian earth, Thompson packed up and went north to the deep silence of the woods. The south wind passing over frozen lakes brings the shifting mists that herald the spring breakup. Thompson, sketching from a rocky point, caught ice and chill water in patterns of blue against the awakening sky. The thrust of young buds through the dead wood brings warm days nearer. And by April, the trees show feathery clear lifting from the half-frozen ground. And from the bright, clear colors of the very early spring, when the green ice slips silently down through the blue water, Thompson painted his first great canvas, Spring Ice. It is a primitive's reaction to the Canadian landscape, boldly patterned and sharp with the intensity of a vision clearly seen. With the melting of the great rivers, agile lumberjacks leap across the booms, and the logs come down in a roaring confusion. Thompson, nimble on his feet as any lumberjack, would stride from log to shore and back up to the sluice gates guarding the lip of the dam. In bold strokes, he sees the swirl of white water and the sharp flash of timber pounding through the sluice gates. Thompson's timber sketches culminated in a new canvas, the Drive. Bold in its simple pattern and alive with the ceaseless movement of big logs swirling in a great curve downstream to the mill. From the low-pitched cabin of Bud Callaghan, one of the park guides, Thompson would set out in his canoe in the late spring. His sharp prow drifted over a drowned land that could speak to the painter. The pattern of spring unfolds swiftly in the Canadian North. Growing foliage and the rising sun bring new lights and shadows. The wildflowers reclaim the dead underbrush with a tapestry of growing brilliance. And the fronds of budding flowers spread their Chinese willow pattern over the warming lakes. The maples film with shoots of green standing out against ramparts of swamp spruce, and underfoot, marsh marigolds and cattails weave a carpet of color. Thompson would sketch beneath the spring trees, finding a newer and richer sense of paint in answer to the soaring colors. But the delicate green soon became the olive monotone of summer. And Thompson would find inspiration in the flowers that filled the woods each year, with a carpet rich in the texture of daisies, black-eyed Susans, fireweed, goldenrod, cornflowers, and vetch. But mostly the woods lacked the dramatic colors he loved, and until fall he earned money as a guide and spent his time in the swift joy of fishing for bass and muskies. With the coming of fall, the Canadian landscape bursts forth as the flame of the dying year blazes along the hills. Here it was that Thompson set down in paint with the glory of stained glass, the image of Canada that has spoken with overwhelming conviction for 30 years. With swift certainty, he caught the thin lines of hardwood stripped bare in the brief twilight. From silver birches by a lake, he created in flat linear patterns the canvas October, in cobalt, deep orange, and blue-gray, the happy pause of Indian summer, and the last of the failing sun. As autumn deepens over the land, the gaunt trees frame a paler sky. Thompson made an angular design of burnt skeletons and rock, lifting under clouds leaden with the first snow. In his research into changing Northland patterns, Thompson was guided by a sure instinct for the dominant factor in every scene, and his small birch panels have the authority and warmth of a large canvas. Like the work of his neighbor artist to the south, Thompson's painting is intensely native, stamping in the hearts and minds of his fellows an image of the country they love. From the fall colors in Algonquin came somber elegies like Northern River, where the tracery of spruce against darkling water becomes a craftsman's pattern. And from the humble jack pine, its irregular branches straggling against the cold autumn sun, Thompson forged an image that is universal, a symbol of the Canadian North in all its lonely beauty. the end of October, the land lies stripped of its color, and the bare ribs of the earth show through. The arms of the naked trees become strange, torn shapes, and the curving outline of the pine cradles a fading sky. The harsh west wind sings a dirge for the dying year. And Thompson, watching a wedge of ducks fly south high over the gray and silent land, painted one of his last great canvases, Chill November. 7 months later, he drowned when his canoe sank into the depths of the lake that was his home. He was barely 40. He had painted for less than 4 years. A.Y. Jackson remembers him vividly.
Thompson has become a mythical figure in Canadian art. His sudden emergence from the field of commercial design into painting, his brief career of less than 4 years as an artist, and his tragic death make the most dramatic story in our art history. Thompson's development was amazing. He loved color, from the most subtle harmonies to pure reds and yellows, painted with a full brush, and with such assurance that he could put a color on and not touch it again. In these few years, he contributed more to Canadian painting than any other artist has done in a lifetime of study and hard work.
Lawren Harris, another fellow artist, remembers.
Tom Thomson had many of the characteristics of genius as a painter. The most noticeable characteristics were a concentrated directness that went right to the heart of whatever he was painting, and an easy and deft yet inspired skill in applying paint, which drew from the color its maximum vitality. This last is a sure sign of the born painter. There was nothing that interfered with Tom's direct primal vision of nature. He was completely innocent of any of the machinery of civilization and was happiest when away from it in the north.
Arthur Lismer recalls the young artist with whom he worked in the commercial studio.
In 5 years, from 1911 to 1917, Thompson's career began and ended. It was a short life, but a tremendously rich and productive one. In that brief time, Canadian art began and achieved a new life. Canada had found an interpreter, one who knew the North Country, who had explored its secrets and revealed its dramatic and varied beauty.
Another fellow artist and poet, J.E.H. MacDonald, designed an inscription for a memorial cairn. That cairn today stands high on Hayhurst Point, overlooking Canoe Lake in Algonquin Park, Ontario. To the memory of Tom Thomson, artist, woodsman, and guide, who was drowned in Canoe Lake on July 8, 1917. He lived humbly but passionately with the wild. It made him brother to all untamed things in nature. It drew him apart and revealed itself wonderfully to him. It sent him out from the woods only to show these revelations through his art. And it took it to himself at last. He was a good Canadian.